The desert sky burned with streaks of crimson and gold as the sun melted into the horizon. The air was still, holding the kind of silence that carried weight. A silence broken only by the steady breath of the land and the faint rustle of the dry grass. A place where every shadow seemed to hide secrets, and every sound whispered a story of survival, courage, and longing. Out here, in the heart of the untamed American frontier, the land demanded loyalty. To belong meant to fight for it. To betray it meant to lose everything. She had never seen eyes like his before dark, fierce and yet filled with a tenderness she could not explain. He stood tall, broad shoulders carrying the strength of his people. Tattoos marking his skin like the stories of warriors gone before him. His braids fell down his chest, decorated with beads that clicked softly when the wind stirred. His presence was powerful, commanding respect. But there was something about him that unsettled her. Something that made her heart beat too fast for comfort. The Apache warrior was not a man easily forgotten. His voice was low, like thunder rolling in the distance, and when he spoke, the world seemed to quiet. He carried himself with pride, but beneath the strength lived a storm, a weight of choices that could not be undone. She could see it in the way his jaw tightened, in the way his gaze lingered when it should have looked away. The girl standing before him had come from a world that was not his. Her hair caught the light of the fading sun, golden strands woven with a simple braid that fell against her shoulder. She looked delicate, as if she did not belong in the harshness of the desert. Yet her spirit had proven stronger than he ever expected. She had crossed paths with danger, endured fear, and still she stood, unbroken. She carried secrets of her own, and though her presence threatened to disrupt the fragile balance of his life, he could not turn away from her. It had begun with stolen glances in the quiet of the night, 8 moments when words were unnecessary. The distance between them had felt like a wall carved by fate, but something stronger kept pulling them back. Something neither could fight, no matter how much they tried. Her world was built on rules, on duty, on expectations she could not deny. His was bound to honor, tradition, and the survival of his people. To come together meant stepping into a fire that could consume them both. The desert was not forgiving. Rumors of raids spread through the land. Whispers of betrayal lingered in every town, and trust was a fragile thread. She knew being near him was dangerous, but her heart could not resist the pull. The Apache was everything forbidden to her, and yet everything she longed for. The nights they shared words beneath the stars had turned into something deeper. Every secret confession carved another mark on her heart, each one making it harder to walk away. He had warned her, told her that his path was not hers to follow. But when she looked at him, she didn't see a warrior destined for endless battles. She saw the man behind the scars, the man whose heart carried dreams he never dared to speak. And in her presence, he felt a peace he thought he had lost forever. Now, with the last light of day spilling across the barren land, he lifted his hand and cupped her face, his thumb brushing against her cheek. His touch was steady, but inside him raged a war he could not control. She closed her eyes, leaning into his hand, her breath unsteady as if she feared the moment would vanish. Like the sun sinking behind the hills. "Say you are mine," he whispered, his voice breaking the silence with a weight she could not ignore. It was not a command. It was a plea, a vow. A dangerous promise, wrapped in longing, her heart pounded, caught between fear and desire. She knew the cost of such words. To claim him was to step into a life where enemies waited at every turn, where her family would turn their backs, where her very safety would be sacrificed. Yet to deny him was to deny the truth she felt deep within her soul. His gaze never wavered, searching hers for an answer, a lifeline in the storm threatening to swallow him. The desert wind brushed past them, carrying with it the weight of the choice she had to make. In that instant, the world seemed to hold its breath. The sound of distant hoofbeats cut through the stillness. Both froze, the moment shattered by the echo of approaching riders. Dust rose in the distance, shadows growing larger with each second. Danger was near, and time had slipped through their fingers. Her lips parted, but the words caught in her throat. She had no chance to speak, no chance to decide, before the sound grew louder, the threat undeniable. He released her face reluctantly, his hand lingering one heartbeat longer before dropping to his side. His eyes burned with unspoken promises, promises that could not wait much longer. The choice remained. To claim him meant risking everything. To stay silent meant losing him forever. And as the hoofbeats thundered closer, she realized that no matter what she chose, the desert would never let them go without a fight. The night was coming fast, and with it, a storm neither of them could escape. The sound of the hoofbeats grew louder, pounding against the desert floor, echoing like war drums in the stillness of twilight. Dust clouds swirled in the distance, rising like a warning, and she felt her chest tighten with dread. The Apache warrior's eyes narrowed, his body tense, as his instincts took over. Every part of him had been trained to recognize danger long before it revealed itself. And now, his silence spoke louder than words. He took her hand firmly, urging her toward the cover of the rocks nearby. Her breath caught as he guided her with quick, careful steps. She had seen danger before, but this was different. This was not the kind that announced itself with threats and laws. This was the kind that swept in uninvited, the kind that left ruin in its wake. She followed, her heart racing. Every part of her, aware that her life was now tied to his choices. They crouched low, hidden in the shadows of the stone, and watched as the riders appeared. At first, only faint shapes could be seen, but as they drew closer, their faces and weapons became clear. These men were not passing travelers. Their eyes searched the land, sharp and restless like predators on the hunt. Their horses snorted and stomped the ground, and the air grew thick with tension. She knew at once they were looking for something. Or someone. The Apache's grip on her hand tightened. His people had long warned of men like these. Traitors turned mercenaries, carrying greed in their hearts and violence in their hands. They had no loyalty to tribe, land, or law. They served only themselves, selling death for coin and leaving fear in their trail. If they found her here with him, there would be no mercy. The thought struck her deeply, a cold shiver spreading down her spine. She glanced at him, and in that brief moment she saw more than strength in his face. She saw conflict. He wanted to protect her, but he also carried the weight of something unspoken. It was as though shadows clung to him, secrets she had yet to learn, secrets that might be the very reason these men had come. The riders slowed, their leader raising a hand to stop the group. His sharp eyes scanned the horizon, pausing too long in their direction, and she held her breath. The Apache warriors shifted, ready to fight if needed, though he knew the odds were against them. There were 5 men on horseback, rifles across their backs, knives at their belts. His own weapon was his blade and his will. But he was Apache, and he carried the spirit of warriors who never surrendered. The leader spoke to his men, his voice low but carried by the desert air. Words of pursuit, of unfinished business, of something taken that must be returned. She could not catch every phrase, but one thing was certain. They were hunting, and their prey was close. Her heart hammered as she wondered if they meant him. Or perhaps her. Either way, their presence meant danger too close to ignore. The group moved on slowly, their shadows stretching long across the sand as the last light of day bled into night. Silence followed in their wake, a silence heavy with unease. The Apache waited until the sound of hoofbeats faded before he finally exhaled. He released her hand, though his eyes stayed fixed on the horizon, sharp and thoughtful. She wanted to ask him who they were, why they searched, but something in his expression stopped her. There was a hardness there, a wall he had built to keep truths hidden. He was a man of few words, and when he spoke, every syllable mattered. Finally his voice came, steady yet edged with warning. You must be careful. They are not men to cross. If they know you are here, they will not rest until they have you. Her breath hitched at his words. Me? Why would they come for me? He looked at her, his eyes dark with things unsaid. For a moment she thought he might reveal the truth, but he only shook his head. There are many reasons a woman alone in this land draws attention. You must trust me. Trust. The word weighed heavy between them. She had trusted him from the start, even when her heart warned her not to. But trust in this land was fragile, often broken as quickly as it was given. Still, the way he had shielded her, the way he had risked being seen, left her with little doubt. Yet deep inside she knew his silence carried secrets that tied him to these men, to dangers she could not yet name. As night wrapped around them, stars blinking awake in the sky, he guided her to a hidden camp. A small fire flickered in the shelter of a canyon wall, casting faint light over the rocky ground. The warmth was welcome, though the shadows pressed close. She sat near the flames, watching him move with quiet precision. Every gesture revealed his life's discipline, how he placed his blade within reach, how he listened to the land even when it seemed silent, how he never truly rested. She wondered what kind of life had shaped him into this man. A life of battles, of loss, of choices no one should have to make. His people had faced struggles that few could imagine, lands taken, promises broken, survival won only through sacrifice. He carried those burdens not only for himself, but for generations before him. She wanted to understand, to share in the truths he carried, but she knew some stories were too heavy to be spoken in the quiet of one night. Instead, she found her thoughts returning to his words at sunset. "Say you are mine." The memory sent heat rushing through her even now, though fear threaded through it. What would it mean if she said yes? To belong to him meant belonging to his world. It meant enemies as well as loyalty, danger as well as love. She traced the thought in her mind, and for every reason she found to step away. Her heart offered one stronger reason to stay. The fire crackled softly, the night carrying scents of sage and dust. He sat across from her, his gaze fixed on the flames, though she knew his mind was far beyond them. At last she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "You carry something, don't you? Something that makes them hunt." His head lifted, eyes meeting hers with intensity. For a long moment he said nothing, as though weighing whether to trust her with the truth. Then he looked away, his voice low. "There are debts in this land. Some paid in blood, some in silence. They believe I owe them both." Her chest tightened. Debts. The word carried weight, promising more questions than answers. She leaned closer, desperate to understand, but he raised a hand. "No more tonight. The desert has ears. We must rest." But rest did not come easily. Every whisper of the wind, every distant cry of a coyote made her heart leap. She lay awake, watching the stars above, wondering what fate had tied her to him, and if she was strong enough to walk the path it demanded. And just as sleep began to claim her, sound broke through the night. The faint, deliberate crunch of footsteps approaching the canyon wall. Her eyes flew open, and she turned to him. He was already awake, blade in hand, his gaze sharp, his body still as stone. He pressed a finger to his lips, a warning to stay silent. The footsteps grew closer, steady, unhurried, as if whoever approached already knew they were not alone. Her pulse raced. Whoever it was, whatever reason had brought them here, one truth became clear. The night was far from over. The footsteps moved slowly across the canyon floor. Each step deliberate, each pause longer than the last, as though the intruder wanted them to know he was there. The fire had burned down 2 glowing embers, giving just enough light to outline the Apache's profile. His blade caught a faint glimmer, his grip steady, eyes sharp as he waited. She could feel her own pulse in her throat, her body frozen between fear and the strange calm that always came when danger was near. The intruder finally stepped into view. A tall figure cloaked in the shadows, his face partly hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat. His voice carried across the canyon, low and mocking, "I knew I'd find you sooner or later." The desert has a way of uncovering secrets. The Apache did not rise from where he sat, but the tension in his shoulders was unmistakable. She watched the man carefully, sensing the familiarity in his tone. Whoever he was, he knew the warrior, and not as a friend. "You shouldn't have come here," the Apache said evenly. Though his voice carried a warning, the man stepped closer, the faint light revealing the scar running down his jaw, a mark that looked old and cruel. His eyes shifted to her for a brief moment before returning to the Apache. A smirk tugged at his lips. So it's true. You've taken her under your protection. That will make things easier. For me, not for you. Her breath caught. The way he spoke of her, as if she were nothing more than leverage, sent a chill through her. The Apache's hand tightened on the blade, his voice like steel. You will not touch her. The scarred man chuckled. Always so noble. But nobility doesn't keep you alive out here. You know what I want? You always knew this day would come. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the crackle of dying embers. She looked between them, her mind racing. What was it that tied them together? What debt, what betrayal, what truth had brought this enemy to their camp? She wanted to ask, but fear held her tongue. The Apache finally rose, tall and unyielding. He moved between her and the intruder, his body a shield. Leave. Tonight is not the night for this fight. The scarred man tilted his head, as though weighing his options. Then, with a dark smile, he stepped back into the shadows. You can delay, but you can't escape. The desert will close in on you, and when it does, neither of you will walk away. The sound of his retreating steps echoed for a long time. Long after he had vanished into the night, the Apache lowered his blade, but did not relax. He stood still, eyes fixed on the darkness, listening, till at last he turned back to her. She searched his face for answers, but he said nothing. Instead, he stirred the fire back to life, his silence louder than any confession. When morning came, the desert stretched wide and empty again, as though nothing had happened. Yet the weight of the night lingered between them. She finally broke the silence as they packed their things. Who was he? The Apache's hand stilled, his gaze fixed on the horizon. A man with no honor. A man who hunts what he cannot have. Her voice trembled. And what is it he wants from you? For a moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, in a low tone, he said, something that was taken long ago. Something he believes I stole, though it was never his to claim. The vague reply only deepened her unease. What could be so valuable that it brought mercenaries, enemies, and strangers to hunt him across the desert? She thought of the riders from the night before, of their leader's searching gaze. Were they connected to this scarred man? Or were they another threat entirely? As they moved on, the land around them shifted, the desert giving way to canyons that seemed carved by fire and time. She felt the weight of the past pressing down with every step. The Apache walked ahead, his movements confident. But she could see the strain in his eyes when he looked back at her. That night, as they set camp again, she pressed him further. If you keep secrets from me, I cannot stand beside you. I need to know what danger I've been pulled into. He looked at her for a long time, his face unreadable, before finally speaking. My people guarded something sacred passed down for generations. It was not gold or silver, but it held more power than both. Outsiders learned of it, and they wanted it. Some were killed for it. Others betrayed their own. That man was one of them. He believes I hold the key, but what I carry is not mine alone to give. Her chest tightened. His words painted a picture of betrayal, of stolen legacies and endless pursuit. It explained the weight in his gaze, the danger that seemed to follow him like a shadow. But it also revealed something else, why he had asked her to say she was his. It was not only desire, it was a need for loyalty, for someone to stand beside him when the world closed in. She wanted to speak. To tell him she was willing, but the fear of what it meant held her silent. Instead, she asked, and if they find us? If they believe you still hold what they seek? He turned to the fire, the flames flickering across the sharp lines of his face. Then they will come with everything they have, and we will stand or fall together. The word together struck her deeply. It was not a promise, not yet. But it was enough to bind her to the moment, enough to remind her why she could not walk away. The days that followed were tense, filled with the constant awareness of being hunted. At times she thought she saw shadows on the ridges above them, movement that vanished when she looked twice. At night, every sound carried threat. Yet amidst the fear, their bond grew stronger. The Apache taught her how to read the land, how to listen to the wind, how to move silently. She learned quickly, surprising even herself. and with each lesson she felt less like a burden and more like a partner. Still, the danger did not relent. One evening, as they crossed a dry riverbed, they found a warning left behind. A crude symbol carved into a stone, fresh and sharp. The Apache studied it, his face grim. "They are close," he said. Her stomach twisted. The chase was no longer distant, it was upon them, as they hurried towards safer ground. She thought of the scarred man's words, of the riders who searched the horizon. The conflict was tightening, like a noose, and somewhere in the center of it all was the man she could not stop herself from loving, and the secret he carried that might destroy them both. The night they reached the shelter of a small cave. Rain began to fall, rare and cold against the desert heat. Thunder rolled across the sky, echoing against the stone walls. She sat beside him, shivering, not from the cold but from the storm that pressed closer every day. "What if there is no way out?" she whispered. He turned to her, his hand brushing against hers, his voice steady. "There is always a way. But sometimes the way costs more than we wish to pay." The storm outside raged on. But inside the cave, the silence between them was filled with unspoken truths. The conflict that bound them was no longer distant. It was here, pressing in from every direction. And though neither said it aloud, they both knew the desert would soon demand its price. The storm passed, leaving the desert washed clean, the scent of rain still clinging to the air. The cave where they had sheltered was dark and close, but the silence that followed the thunder seemed sharper than before. She lay awake, listening to his steady breathing beside her, though she knew he was not truly asleep. His hand rested on the hilt of his blade, even in the shadows, his body tense, his mind always on guard. The memory of the scarred man's words echoed in her thoughts, feeding her unease. The conflict that bound them had grown heavier, like chains pulling them toward something neither could escape by dawn. The ground was soft with mud, their footprints clear against the earth. The Apache frowned as he studied the trail. "We must move quickly. Rain hides many things, but not long enough. They will follow." Her heart sank, but she nodded, her body weary, yet her spirit unwilling to falter. She knew now what was at stake, and even if she feared the truth of what he carried, she had chosen to walk beside him. As they moved through the canyons, the land seemed to close in around them, the walls narrowing, shadows deepening. Each turn felt like a trap waiting to be sprung. That night, they lit no fire. Instead, they sat in the dark, their shoulders brushing, the silence heavy with words neither dared to speak. She wanted to reach for him, to ease the weight in his eyes, but the danger pressing down on them held her back. It was as though the desert itself demanded their silence, as if the night air carried their secrets to listening ears. When the sound came, it was faint at first. A whisper of stones shifting, carried on the wind. The Apache rose instantly, his hand pulling her close against the rock. He listened, his breath slow, his body as still as the canyon walls. Then she heard it to the unmistakable rhythm of horses, many of them. Her chest tightened as torches appeared in the distance, flickering against the night. The riders moved in formation, their voices carrying. She recognized one of them, the leader she had seen days before, his sharp gaze scanning every shadow. They were closing the circle, moving carefully, methodically. As though they already knew their prey was cornered, the Apache whispered close to her ear, his tone urgent but calm. "We cannot fight them all. We must move silently, higher into the rocks. Stay close. Do not fall behind." Her body trembled, but she followed, her hands scraping against the stone as they climbed. Every sound felt too loud, the scrape of boots, the rattle of loose stones, but the riders did not stop. They pressed forward, searching. Her lungs burned with the effort of climbing, but fear carried her higher. At last they reached a ledge, hidden by brush. From there, they could see the riders spread out below, torches moving like restless fireflies. The leader barked orders and men dismounted, scanning the ground, searching every crevice. She pressed herself against the rock, her heartbeat pounding in her ears. The Apache's hand steadied her, his touch firm, grounding her even as the danger drew nearer. Then a shout broke the night. One of the riders had found their trail in the softened earth. The voices rose, urgent, and the men gathered quickly. The leader's eyes lit with cold triumph as he turned toward the canyon wall, scanning upward. "They know," she whispered, fear catching in her throat. The Apache's gaze hardened. "Then we cannot hide any longer." The words sent a chill through her. If they could not hide, then only one path remained, and it was soaked in danger. He rose slightly, peering down at the men, his mind already shaping a plan. She could see it in the tight line of his jaw, in the fierce determination burning in his eyes. He would fight not because the odds favored him, but because there was no other choice. The men below began to climb, their torches casting wild shadows across the rocks. The flames made the night alive, each movement a threat, each sound a warning. She clutched the Apache's arm, her voice trembling. "There are too many." His hand brushed her cheek, his touch brief but filled with meaning. "Together, remember?" Her chest tightened at the word, the promise woven into it. She nodded, though fear weighed on her like stone. The first of the riders reached the base of the ledge, climbing with practiced ease. The Apache moved silently, his blade ready, his body crouched like a predator waiting for the strike. She could see every muscle tense, every breath drawn carefully. The man below did not see him until it was too late. With swift precision, the Apache struck, silent and sure, sending the intruder crashing back to the earth. The sound of his fall echoed, and chaos erupted below. Shouts filled the canyon, torches flaring brighter as more men surged upward. Arrows whistled through the night, striking the rocks dangerously close. She ducked, pressing against the stone, her body shaking. The Apache stood firm, his blade flashing in the firelight, his movements fierce and unrelenting. He was outnumbered, yet he fought with the strength of 10 men, his spirit unbroken. But for every enemy he struck down, 2 more climbed. The circle was closing, the ledge shrinking beneath the weight of danger. She felt helpless, caught between the urge to flee and the need to stay by his side. The desert air was thick with smoke, dust, and the cries of men, every heartbeat carrying them closer to the breaking point. Then, through the chaos, she saw him, the scarred man. He stood at the edge of the firelight, his gaze fixed upward, his smile cruel. He did not climb, not yet. He waited, confident that the net would tighten, that the Apache would have no escape. His eyes shifted briefly to her, and the look he gave sent ice through her veins. She realized in that moment that this was not just about the sacred things stolen, not just about debts or betrayal. It was personal. He wanted to break the Apache, and he would use her to do it. The Apache followed her gaze and saw him too. Their eyes locked across the distance, years of hatred flashing between them in silence. The scarred man raised his voice, mocking. "You can't fight forever. Sooner or later, she will fall. And when she does, she'll fall because of you." The words cut deeper than any blade. She saw the flicker of pain in the Apache's eyes, quickly buried beneath steel resolve. He tightened his grip on his weapon, his jaw set. "He will not take you," he whispered fiercely to her. The ledge shook under the weight of another attacker. The Apache moved swiftly, striking with deadly precision, but the numbers pressed harder, the night closing in. She clung to the stone, her breath ragged, the world around her a blur of fire, shadows, and steel. The scarred man gave the order, his voice ringing clear. More men began to climb, their torches lighting the canyon like a river of fire. The night was alive with chaos, the air filled with the sound of war, and in the center of it all, she stood with him, caught in a storm that would not let them go. The suspense hung sharp, each moment stretched thin, the weight of the climax pressing closer. The desert held its breath, waiting for the moment when everything would break. The ledge shook beneath them, the night burning with firelight and steel. But in that moment, he did not see the crowd of enemies or hear the shouts echoing across the canyon. He saw only her. Fear had tightened her breath, her hands gripping the rock so hard her knuckles whitened, yet she held her ground. She had chosen to stay with him, even knowing it could cost everything. That truth gave him strength. Even as the circle of enemies closed in tighter, the scarred man stepped forward at last. his smile sharp in the glow of torches. "This ends tonight," he called out, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Give me what I came for, and perhaps I will leave her alive." The Apache's jaw tightened, his body a wall between her and the enemy. He answered without hesitation, his voice steady and firm. "You will leave with nothing. Not her, not the sacred gift, not my soul." The scarred man's smile faded, replaced by cold fury. He gave the order, and the riders surged upward together, determined to overwhelm. Steel clashed in the firelight, arrows streaked through the air, and the canyon became a storm of sound and fury. She ducked low, pressing against the stone, but her eyes never left him. Each movement was fierce, every strike a dance between life and death. He fought as though the spirits of his ancestors guided his hand, his blade flashing with strength born of loyalty and love. One enemy lunged too close to her. She gasped, frozen, but before he could strike, the Apache moved with deadly precision, pulling her into his arms as the man fell. His chest heaved with breath, his eyes burning with fierce promise. "You are safe with me," he said, and she believed him. Even as danger roared all around, the battle raged until the canyon floor was littered with fallen men. The riders who remained faltered, their courage breaking beneath the storm of his will. But the scarred man did not retreat. He climbed with relentless focus, his eyes locked on the Apache, each step fueled by hatred. This was not about treasure, not about debts. This was about revenge, about pride, about a past scar that had never healed. At last, he reached the ledge. The two men stood face to face, the air between them heavy with history. For a moment, the night seemed to hold its breath. "You took everything from me," the scarred man hissed. "Now I will take everything from you." Their blades clashed, sparks flying, the sound sharp against the stone. The Apache fought with steady strength, but the scarred man was driven by rage, every strike wild and merciless. She could only watch, her hands trembling, her heart caught between terror and hope. The fight was brutal, each man refusing to yield. The scarred man pressed forward, forcing the Apache to the edge of the ledge. For one terrible moment, she thought he would fall, but then something shifted. The Apache's eyes burned with clarity, his blade moving with sudden precision. With one final strike, he disarmed his enemy, sending the weapon clattering into the canyon below. The scarred man stumbled, his balance lost, his fury breaking into fear. He reached for the Apache, but the stone crumbled beneath his weight. His scream echoed as he fell into the darkness, swallowed by the desert that had claimed so many before him. Silence followed, broken only by the crackle of dying torches. The remaining riders fled, their courage shattered without their leader. The canyon grew still, the firelight dimming as the night returned to silence. The Apache stood tall, his blade still in hand, his chest rising and falling with deep breaths. Then he turned to her, his eyes softening as he reached for her. "It is finished," he said. His voice low but certain. She rushed into his arms, tears stinging her eyes. The fear, the tension, the endless nights of running, they all broke at once, replaced by the overwhelming relief of survival. She clung to him, feeling the steady beat of his heart. Knowing it had carried them through the storm, they stayed there for a long time, holding on to one another as the desert sky turned pale with dawn. The fight had ended, but the bond between them had been forged in fire. It was not just protection or loyalty now. It was love, fierce and unshakable, born of danger and tested against the harshest trials in the days that followed. They moved slowly, no longer hunted but still cautious. The desert stretched wide before them, not as a trap, but as a promise of freedom. She listened as he told her more of his people, of the sacred gift that had brought such danger. It was not gold, not a weapon, but a story. A legacy of wisdom passed down through generations, a truth meant to guide and protect. Outsiders had twisted it into something to covet, but for his people, it was life itself. She understood now why he had carried the burden in silence. It was not his alone to share. Yet by standing with him, she had become part of it, tied to the story by her own choice. One evening, as the sun set over the horizon, painting the sky with fire and gold, she turned to him. When you first asked me to say I was yours, I did not know what it meant. Now I do, and I am." His eyes softened, a rare smile touching his lips. He pulled her close, his forehead resting against hers. "And I am yours." The desert wind carried their words away, as if sealing them into the land itself. For the first time since they had met, there was no fear of pursuit, no shadow of betrayal. There was only the two of them, bound by a love stronger than the storms they had survived. She thought of all they had faced, the mercenaries, the scarred man, the endless nights of uncertainty, and realized the lesson the desert had given them. Love was not safe, not easy, not free of danger. It demanded courage, sacrifice, and trust, even when the path was dark. But it was also the greatest strength, the one thing that could not be stolen or broken. Their journey was not over. The desert was vast, the future uncertain, but they would face it together. The conflicts that had chased them had left scars, but also truths. She knew now that the heart could endure more than fear, that loyalty could outlast betrayal, and that love, even in the harshest of lands, could bloom fierce and unshakable. As the stars lit the night sky, they sat together, their hands entwined, their hearts steady. The story that had begun with whispered words and unspoken danger had reached its end, but its echoes would remain. It was a tale of survival, of romance, of choices made when everything was at stake. And as the desert winds sang through the canyons, carrying their laughter into the night, she knew the truth with certainty. They had found more than safety, more than freedom. They had found one another, and that was the greatest treasure of all.